The morning sun cut through the smog hanging over downtown Los Angeles like a knife through butter, casting long shadows across the cracked pavement of Sunset Boulevard. It was the kind of California morning that promised heat, the suffocating, relentless kind that made the asphalt shimmer and turned car interiors into ovens by noon. I stood outside Romano's elite auto shop, watching the steady stream of traffic crawl past, and tried to remember when everything had gone so catastrophically wrong. My name is Marcus Chen, and 6 months ago I was one of the most sought-after automotive engineers in Southern California. I had worked for prestigious racing teams, consulted for luxury car dealerships, and built a reputation that opened doors most mechanics could only dream of. My specialty was European supercars, Ferraris, Lamborghinis, McLarens, the kinds of machines that cost more than most people's houses and required a delicate touch combined with profound technical knowledge. Then came the Rossi incident. Giovanni Rossi is, a real estate mogul with a collection of exotic cars worth over $20 million. His pride and joy was a 1962 Ferrari 250 GTO, one of only 36 ever made, valued at approximately $45 million. He had brought it to my former shop for what should have been routine maintenance, an engine tune-up, brake inspection and fluid changes. I can still remember the weight of the keys in my hand, the way the leather seats smelled of aged luxury and careful preservation. I had worked on countless Ferraris before, but never one this rare, this valuable, this historically significant. Maybe that's where my arrogance came from, the belief that my experience made me invincible, that I could handle anything with 4 wheels and an engine. The mistake happened during the test drive. I'd taken the car out on Mulholland Drive, wanting to ensure the engine adjustments held up under real driving conditions. The road was clear, the morning was beautiful, and I pushed the accelerator a little harder than necessary, just a little. What I didn't account for was the vintage braking system original to the car, meticulously preserved but not designed for modern driving speeds. When a deer bounded into the road around a blind curve, I slammed on the brakes. The car responded, but not quickly enough. I swerved, overcorrected, and sent $45 million of automotive history sliding sideways into a concrete barrier. The impact wasn't devastating. No explosion, no fire, nothing Hollywood would find dramatic. But the damage was comprehensive: crumpled front fender, shattered headlight assembly, bent suspension components, and worst of all, a cracked engine block from the sudden deceleration. The car was repairable technically, but the cost would run into the millions, and the historical integrity of an original 1962 Ferrari 250 GTO had been permanently compromised. Rossi's lawsuit was swift and merciless. My insurance covered some of the damages, but not nearly enough. My reputation, built over 15 years of flawless work, crumbled in an instant. High-end clients disappeared. Racing teams stopped returning my calls. Within 3 months, I had lost my position at the prestigious shop where I'd worked, burned through my savings covering legal fees and partial damages, and found myself blacklisted from every top-tier automotive establishment in the city. Now, here I was, standing outside Romano's elite auto shop at 7 in the morning, starting my first day at a mid-tier garage that specialized in everyday repairs, oil changes, brake jobs, tire rotations. It was honest work, nothing to be ashamed of. But for someone who had once calibrated engines for Le Mans race cars, it felt like a prison sentence. "You, Chen?" a gruff voice called from the garage entrance. I turned to see Frank Romano himself, the shop owner. He was in his late 50s, built like a fire hydrant, with oil-stained hands and a face weathered by decades of breathing in exhaust fumes and chemical solvents. His expression was neutral, neither welcoming nor hostile, just assessing. "Yes, sir," I replied, extending my hand. "Marcus Chen. Thanks for giving me this opportunity. Romano's handshake was firm, his palm calloused. I read about what happened with the Rossi car, he said bluntly. Expensive mistake. I felt my jaw tighten. Yes, it was. You know why I'm hiring you anyway? He didn't wait for me to answer. Because everyone deserves a second chance, and because underneath that disaster, you've got 15 years of solid experience. I need a good mechanic. You need work. We clear on expectations. Crystal clear, I said. I'm here to work, prove myself, and rebuild. Good. Come on, I'll introduce you to the crew. Romano turned and walked into the garage, and I followed. The shop was exactly what I expected. Functional, organized, but nothing fancy. 6 service bays, each equipped with hydraulic lifts and basic diagnostic equipment. The smell was familiar. Motor oil, brake fluid, rubber, and the faint metallic tang of welding work. 3 mechanics were already at work, scattered across different bays. Classic rock played from a radio somewhere, competing with the pneumatic hiss of an impact wrench. This is Tommy, Romano said, gesturing to a young man in his 20s, working under the hood of a Honda Civic. Tommy looked up, wiped his hands on his coveralls, and gave me a friendly nod. He's been with me for 3 years, good with diagnostics. Welcome aboard, Tommy said with genuine warmth. Over there is Reggie, Romano continued, pointing to an older black man who was rotating tires on a pickup truck. Reggie raised a hand in greeting, but didn't approach. 20 years in the business. If it's got wheels, Reggie can fix it. I nodded respectfully. These were good people, solid mechanics who took pride in their work. I needed to remember that. Not everyone worked on Ferraris, and that didn't make their expertise any less valuable. And that, Romano said, his tone shifting slightly, is our newest hire before you. Started 2 weeks ago. I looked where he was pointing and felt my eyebrows rise involuntarily. In the far bay, working on what appeared to be a Ford Mustang, was a woman who couldn't have been more than 30 years old. She was small, maybe 5'4", with dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. She wore the same blue coveralls as everyone else, and her hands moved with quick, confident precision as she worked on the Mustang's engine. What caught my attention, however, wasn't her gender or size, but what was spread out on the workbench beside her. Her tool collection looked like it had been assembled from a thrift store clearance bin. The toolbox itself was battered and rusted, covered in duct tape patches. The wrenches appeared mismatched, some clearly cheap replacements rather than professional-grade equipment. I could see at least 2 tools that had been jury-rigged with welded extensions, and her diagnostic scanner looked like it was from the early 2000s, ancient by modern standards. That's Maya Rodriguez, Romano said. Former army mechanic. Served 2 tours maintaining vehicles in some pretty rough conditions. She knows her stuff, even if her tools have seen better days. I tried to keep my expression neutral, but something must have shown on my face because Romano's eyes narrowed slightly. Problem? He asked. No problem, I said quickly. Just surprised to see that kind of equipment in a professional shop. Her tools work just fine, Romano said, his tone carrying a note of warning, and so does she. Maya, come meet the new guy. The woman, Maya, looked up from her work, set down whatever she'd been adjusting, and walked over. Up close, I could see grease smudged on her cheek and forearms, and her dark eyes carried the kind of sharp intelligence that came from experience, not just training. There was something in her posture, a certain economy of movement that spoke of military discipline. Maya Rodriguez, she said, extending a hand. Her grip was surprisingly strong, her palm textured with calluses. Marcus Chen, I replied. Nice to meet you. Frank mentioned you worked with high-end cars before, Maya said, her expression neutral. That must have been interesting work. It had its moments, I said carefully, not wanting to get into the Rossi story again. My eyes drifted back to her toolbox despite my best efforts. You, Mentioned you were Army. What was that like? Hot, sandy, and full of equipment that always broke at the worst possible time, Maya said with a slight smile. You learn to improvise a lot. Good tools are great when you have them, but knowing how to work with what you've got is more important. There was something in the way she said it, not defensive, just matter of fact, that made me feel vaguely uncomfortable, like I'd been judged and found wanting without a word being said directly. Well, I said, forcing a professional smile, I'm looking forward to working with everyone here. Likewise, Maya said, though her eyes told me she'd picked up on my earlier reaction to her tools. If you need anything, just ask. We're a team here. She returned to her work, and Romano led me to my assigned bay, the second one from the left, currently empty but already equipped with a standard tool cart and lift controls. Your first job is waiting, Romano said, gesturing to a silver Toyota Camry parked just outside. Customer says it's making a weird noise when she accelerates. Diagnostic check. Figure out the problem. Give me an estimate. Think you can handle that? Absolutely, I said, grateful for the straightforward assignment. Romano nodded and walked back toward his office, leaving me alone with the Camry and my thoughts. I spent the next hour doing the diagnostic work, and honestly, it felt good to work with my hands again, without the crushing pressure of dealing with irreplaceable automotive history. The problem turned out to be a worn serpentine belt. Simple, straightforward, easily fixed. I wrote up the estimate and brought it to Romano's office. Good work, he said after reviewing it. Replace the belt, get it done before lunch. The morning passed in a rhythm I hadn't experienced in years. There was something almost meditative about the work. No drama, no celebrity clients, no cars worth more than my entire childhood home. Just vehicles that needed fixing and people who needed them fixed properly and affordably. Around 11, I took a break and grabbed a cup of coffee from the small break room. Maya was already there, washing grease off her hands at the industrial sink. How's your first morning going? She asked without looking up. Better than I expected, honestly, I admitted. It's been a while since I worked on everyday cars. They're the backbone of the industry, Maya said, drying her hands on a paper towel. Supercars are impressive, but most people are just trying to get to work. Take their kids to school, live their lives. There's something honest about that. I found myself nodding. Yeah, I'm starting to remember that. Maya grabbed a bottle of water from the mini-fridge and leaned against the counter. Frank told me about the Ferrari situation. That must have been rough. I tensed slightly. It was the worst mistake of my career. Mistakes happen, Maya said simply. In the Army, I once misdiagnosed an engine problem on a transport truck, delayed a supply convoy by 6 hours. People didn't get food and water when they needed it because I screwed up the initial assessment. What happened? I asked despite myself. I learned to triple-check my work, ask for second opinions when something felt off, and remember that every job matters, whether it's a Ferrari or a Ford. Pride is expensive and humility keeps you sharp. She took a sip of water, her gaze steady. Frank's giving you a second chance. Don't waste it being bitter about where you are. Use it to remember why you became a mechanic in the first place. Before I could respond, Tommy stuck his head into the break room. Marcus, you got a customer asking questions about their estimate. Can you come out front? Yeah, I'll be right there, I said. I glanced back at Maya, who had already turned back to the sink. Thanks for the talk. Any time, she said without turning around. I spent the rest of the day working through a steady stream of jobs, brake replacements, oil changes, a transmission fluid flush. It was honest work, and I felt a strange sense of satisfaction as each vehicle drove away, fixed and functional. By the time Romano called everyone together at 5 o'clock, I was exhausted, but in a good way, my muscles remembering what real work felt like. All right, listen up, Romano said, gathering the crew near the front office. Got something unusual coming in tomorrow morning. Private client, friend of a friend situation. He's got a 2018 Ferrari 488 Spider that apparently won't start. Electrical issue, sounds like. He's willing to pay premium rates for a quick turnaround. My heart rate picked up at the mention of Ferrari. This was it. A chance to prove I could still handle high-end work, that the Rossi incident was a fluke, not a reflection of my skills. "I'll take it," I said immediately. "That's my specialty. I can have it diagnosed and fixed by tomorrow afternoon." Romano looked at me for a long moment, then shook his head. "Actually, I was thinking Maya should take lead on this one." I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. "What? Why?" "Because she's excellent with electrical diagnostics," Romano said calmly. "And because you need to remember that you're not the only skilled mechanic in this shop. Frank, with all due respect, I've worked on dozens of Ferraris. A 488 Spider's electrical system is complex. It requires specific diagnostic equipment and Maya served 2 tours, keeping military vehicles running in the middle of the desert with half the equipment and twice the pressure." Romano cut me off. "She can handle it. You'll assist her." The word assist landed like a slap. Assist. Me assisting someone with a battered toolbox and jury-rigged equipment on a Ferrari. "Frank, I really think—" "It's decided, Marcus," Romano said, his tone brooking no argument. "This isn't about your ego, it's about the job. Maya takes lead, you assist, that's it." I looked over at Maya, expecting to see triumph or smugness, but her expression was neutral, professional. If anything, she looked slightly uncomfortable with the situation. "Understood," I said through gritted teeth. "Good. Be here at 7 sharp tomorrow. The Ferrari's being dropped off at 8. Romano dismissed us, and everyone began gathering their things to leave. I walked to my car, a 10-year-old Honda Accord, another reminder of how far I'd fallen, and sat in the driver's seat without starting the engine. The late afternoon sun beat down on the windshield, and I could feel sweat beginning to form on my forehead. This was humiliating. After everything I'd accomplished, everything I'd built, I was being relegated to assistant status on a Ferrari repair, working under someone whose tools looked like they belonged in a garage sale. I knew I should let it go, accept Romano's decision with grace, prove myself through hard work rather than complaints. But pride is a stubborn thing, and mine had taken too many hits already. Tomorrow, I told myself, I'd show them all what real expertise looked like. Maya Rodriguez might know her way around army trucks, but a Ferrari 488 Spider was a different beast entirely. When she inevitably struggled with the sophisticated electrical system, I'd be there to step in and save the day. It would all work out. It had to. I had no idea how wrong I was, or how much I was about to learn about the difference between tools and skill, between arrogance and expertise, between the mechanic I thought I was and the one I needed to become. As I finally started my car and pulled out onto Sunset Boulevard, heading home through the heavy Los Angeles traffic, I couldn't shake the image of Maya's battered toolbox and improvised equipment. Tomorrow would be interesting, I thought. I had no idea. I arrived at Romano's elite auto shop at 6:45 the next morning. A full 15 minutes earlier than required. The Los Angeles dawn was just beginning to break, painting the smog-tinted sky in shades of orange and pink that would have been beautiful if they didn't represent air pollution. I parked my Honda in the small employee lot and sat for a moment, sipping gas station coffee that tasted like burnt cardboard, mentally preparing myself for the day ahead. The Ferrari 488 Spider would arrive in just over an hour. I had spent the previous evening researching every common electrical issue the model experienced, reviewing diagnostic protocols, and even watching a few technical videos to refresh my memory. I wanted to be ready, not just competent, but undeniably expert. When Maya inevitably hit a wall with her outdated equipment and improvised tools, I would step in smoothly, professionally, and solve the problem. Romano would see that despite the Rossi incident, I was still the best person for high-end work. The shop was quiet when I entered through the side door, only the hum of the fluorescent lights breaking the silence. I made my way to my assigned bay and began organizing my tools, laying out everything I might need for electrical diagnostics: multimeter, oscilloscope, the shop's Ferrari-specific diagnostic scanner, wire strippers, electrical tape, spare fuses, and various connectors. "You're here early." I turned to find Maya entering the garage from the back entrance, a large travel mug in one hand and her battered toolbox in the other. She wore the same blue coveralls as yesterday, her dark hair again pulled back in a practical ponytail. Despite the early hour, she looked alert and ready. "Wanted to be prepared," I said, keeping my tone neutral. "Big job today." "It's just an electrical diagnostic," Maya said with a slight smile, setting her toolbox down near the bay Romano had designated for the Ferrari. "But I appreciate the enthusiasm." I watched as she began setting up her workspace and once again found myself bothered by the state of her equipment. The toolbox, when opened, revealed an interior that was even more concerning than the exterior. Tools wrapped in cloth to prevent rattling, several homemade diagnostic probes, and what appeared to be a battery-powered multimeter that might have been manufactured when I was still in elementary school. "Do you need to borrow any equipment?" I asked, trying to sound helpful rather than condescending. "The shop has modern diagnostic tools you could use." Maya glanced up at me, and something flickered in her expression. Not offense exactly, but a kind of weary recognition, like she'd heard this exact comment many times before. "I've got what I need," she said simply, "but thanks." "It's just that Ferrari's electrical systems are pretty sophisticated," I continued, unable to stop myself. "The diagnostic protocols require specific equipment to interface with the ECU, and—" "Marcus," Maya interrupted gently, "I know what I'm doing. I've diagnosed electrical problems in vehicles a lot more complicated than a 488 Spider, in conditions a lot worse than a clean garage in Los Angeles. I'm good, really." The dismissal stung, even though her tone wasn't rude. I nodded and turned back to my own preparations, feeling my jaw tighten. Tommy and Reggie arrived around 7:15, both nodding greetings as they headed to their respective bays and began setting up for the day's regular work. Romano showed up at 7:30, immediately pouring himself coffee from the industrial-sized pot in the break room before making his rounds to check on everyone. "Ferrari's supposed to be here at 8, he said, stopping by Maya's bay. "Owner's name is David Preston. Tech startup guy. Made his money in apps or cryptocurrency or some damn thing. He's anxious about the car. Just bought it 6 months ago. Already having problems." "What exactly is happening with it?" Maya asked, pulling out a small notebook from her coverall pocket. "Won't start at all," Romano said. "All the dashboard lights come on, electronics seem to work, but when he turns the key, nothing happens. No engine turnover, no clicking, nothing. He had it towed here because his regular dealership is backed up for 3 weeks. I felt a small surge of confidence. That symptom profile suggested several possible issues: starter motor failure, faulty ignition switch, security system malfunction, or possibly a problem with the battery management system. All straightforward enough for someone with my experience. "We'll get it sorted," Maya said, jotting notes. "I know you will," Romano said, then looked at me. "Marcus, you're assisting Maya today. That means you follow her lead, provide tools when asked, and offer input when she requests it. You do not take over unless she specifically asks you to. We clear?" The instruction felt like a reprimand, even though Romano's tone was neutral. "Crystal clear," I said, working to keep the frustration out of my voice. At 8:07, A flatbed tow truck pulled into the parking lot, carrying one of the most beautiful machines I'd seen in months. The Ferrari 488 Spider gleamed even in the harsh morning sunlight, Rosso Corsa red, the classic Ferrari color, with a black interior visible through the windows. The car was immaculate, clearly meticulously maintained, which made the mechanical failure even more frustrating for its owner. David Preston followed in a black Tesla Model S, parking quickly and jumping out to oversee the unloading. He was in his early 30s, dressed in expensive casual wear, designer jeans, a tech company t-shirt, and sneakers that probably cost more than my monthly rent. His anxiety was visible in the way he hovered around the tow truck, watching every movement as the Ferrari was carefully lowered to the ground. "Please be careful with it," Preston said unnecessarily to the tow truck driver, who clearly knew what he was doing. "The paint is original, and there's already a scratch on the front bumper that I'm planning to get fixed." Romano met Preston by the shop entrance, shaking hands and engaging in the kind of smooth customer service conversation he'd probably perfected over 30 years in business. After a few minutes, Preston signed some paperwork, handed over the keys and fob, and reluctantly departed in his Tesla, looking back at the Ferrari multiple times as he drove away. "All right," Romano called out, gesturing to Maya and me. "It's all yours. Keep me updated on what you find." Maya approached the Ferrari like it was any other vehicle. No reverence, no hesitation, just professional assessment. She walked around it slowly, checking the obvious things. Tire pressure by sight, looking under the car for any visible leaks or damage, examining the wheel wells for any signs of recent impact or unusual wear. "Want me to pop the hood?" I asked, keys in hand. "Not yet," Maya said, crouching down near the front driver's side wheel. "Always start with the basics. One of my first instructors in the army used to say, a complex problem usually has a simple cause. People always want to jump to the sophisticated systems, but sometimes it's something basic." I shifted my weight impatiently. "Frank said the dashboard electronics work, but the engine won't turn over. That's pretty clearly an electrical issue in the starting system." "Probably," Maya agreed, standing up and brushing off her knees. "But let's verify everything systematically. Hand me the keys." I passed them over, and Maya climbed into the driver's seat. The interior was pristine. Black leather that still had that new car smell. Carbon fiber trim pieces, the latest infotainment system. She turned the key to the accessory position, and immediately the dashboard lit up like a Christmas tree. All the warning lights, the digital display, the entertainment system, everything powered on perfectly. "Batteries clearly not dead," I observed from where I stood by the open door. "Agreed," Maya said. She turned the key further to the start position. Nothing. No sound, no click, no attempt to engage the starter motor. Just silence. "Definitely not the battery," Maya murmured, turning the key back off. "And the fact that there's no clicking sound suggests it's not the starter solenoid either." She climbed out and popped the hood release. The front trunk, frunk in Ferrari terminology, lifted to reveal the immaculate engine bay. Everything was clean, organized, clearly dealer-maintained. Maya immediately began tracing wire harnesses with her eyes, not touching anything yet, just observing. "Could be the starter motor itself," I suggested, "or possibly the security system isn't recognizing the key fob and preventing ignition." "Both possible," Maya said, pulling out her ancient-looking multimeter. "Let's start testing voltage at key points." She began working methodically, testing the battery voltage first. 12. 7 volts. Perfect. Then moving to test the voltage at various points in the starting system. I stood beside her, ready to hand over tools or equipment, but increasingly frustrated by the slow, systematic pace. With modern diagnostic equipment, we could plug into the car's OBD2 port and get detailed error codes in seconds. "We should use the shop's Ferrari diagnostic scanner," I said. unable to keep quiet anymore. It would tell us immediately if there's a fault code stored in the ECU. Maya paused in her testing and looked up at me. "We will," she said patiently. "But I want to verify the basics first. Diagnostic scanners are great, but they're not infallible. I've seen plenty of situations where the scanner gives you a code that leads you down the wrong path because there's an underlying issue the computer can't detect. That's pretty rare with modern Ferrari systems," I countered. "Their diagnostics are extremely sophisticated." "Marcus," Maya said, her tone still patient but firmer now, "I appreciate your input, but I've got a process that works. Trust me on this, okay?" I bit back my response and nodded stiffly. This was going exactly as I'd feared. Slow, methodical, using outdated tools and methods when modern technology could solve the problem in a fraction of the time. Maya continued her voltage testing for another 20 minutes, documenting each reading in her small notebook. I watched, simultaneously impressed by her systematic approach and frustrated by what felt like unnecessary caution. Finally, she straightened up and wiped her hands on a rag. "All right," she said. "Voltage is good throughout the starting circuit. Let's check the actual starter motor connections." "Hey!" The starter motor on a 488 Spider is not easily accessible. It requires removing several components to reach it properly. Maya grabbed her toolbox and began extracting tools, including what appeared to be a homemade swivel extension that looked like it had been welded together from spare parts. "Is that thing safe?" I asked before I could stop myself. Maya looked at the extension, then at me, and for the first time I saw a flash of genuine irritation cross her face. "This thing was made by one of the best fabricators in my unit," she said quietly. "We needed custom tools to maintain vehicles in environments where getting proper equipment took weeks or months. Yes, it's safe. Yes, it works. And yes, I'd trust it with a $45 million Ferrari, so a 488 Spider is just fine." And Dali, the reference to a $45 million Ferrari hit me like a physical blow. She knew. Of course she knew about the Rossi incident. Probably everyone in the shop knew. And here I was, questioning her tools, her methods, her competence, when I was the one who destroyed one of the most valuable cars in automotive history. "I'm sorry," I said quietly. "That was out of line." Maya studied me for a moment, then nodded. "It's fine, I get it a lot. Now can you hold this panel while I remove these bolts?" We worked together for the next hour, and I forced myself to pay attention to her methods rather than judging her equipment. What I noticed was remarkable. Every movement was precise, efficient, born from experience. When a bolt proved difficult to reach, she knew exactly which combination of extensions and angles would work. When we needed to disconnect an electrical connector, her fingers found the release tab immediately, without fumbling. This wasn't luck or compensation for poor tools. This was expertise. We finally accessed the starter motor, and Maya began testing the connections directly. Her multimeter, despite its age, gave clear readings. After several minutes of testing, she sat back on her heels and frowned. "The starter motor is getting full voltage," she said. "It should be turning over." "So the motor itself is bad?" I asked. "Maybe," Maya said, but she didn't sound convinced. "But let me check something else first." She pulled out what looked like a homemade stethoscope, literally a piece of tubing with a screwdriver handle attached to one end. She placed the screwdriver tip against the starter motor casing and the tube end against her ear. "Turn the key to start position," she instructed me. I climbed into the driver's seat and turned the key. Still nothing, no sound, no turnover. "Again," Maya called out. I tried again. Same result. Maya removed her improvised stethoscope and stood up, her expression thoughtful. "I can hear the solenoid engaging inside the starter motor, but the motor itself isn't spinning." "So it is a bad starter," I said, already mentally calculating the repair time and parts cost. Hold on, Maya said, reaching back into her toolbox. She pulled out a small rubber mallet, the kind you'd use for delicate work, and gently tapped the starter motor casing in several places. "What are you doing?" I asked, confused. "Sometimes starter motors develop dead spots on their armature," Maya explained as she tapped. "It's rare in newer cars, but it happens. A gentle tap can sometimes shift the armature enough to get past the dead spot. Try the key again." I turned the key, expecting nothing. The Ferrari's V8 engine roared to life. I sat there, frozen, as the beautiful sound of 8 cylinders firing in perfect harmony filled the garage. The engine ran smooth, steady, no warning lights, no unusual sounds, just perfect mechanical symphony. "You have got to be kidding me," I muttered. I climbed out of the car to find Maya smiling, not smugly, not triumphantly, just satisfied. "Dead spot on the armature, just like I thought," she said over the engine noise. "It'll probably keep working for a while now, but the customer should really replace the starter motor soon. It'll fail completely eventually." "You fixed it by hitting it with a hammer," I said, still processing what had just happened. "Gently tapping with a rubber mallet to shift the armature position," Maya corrected, but her smile widened. "But yeah, basically." I felt something crumble inside me, not my ego exactly, though that certainly took a hit, but something more fundamental. A wall I'd built between myself and this place, this job, these people. A wall made of pride, arrogance, and the false belief that expensive tools and prestigious experience made me superior. "That was brilliant," I said, and meant it. "That was experience," Maya replied, turning off the engine. "In the army, we didn't always have new parts or perfect diagnostic equipment. We had to keep vehicles running no matter what. You learned to listen, to feel, to understand how machines actually work, instead of just following diagnostic flowcharts." She began putting her tools away, and I helped her, handing over wrenches and extensions, actually looking at them now rather than dismissing them. The homemade swivel extension was beautifully crafted, the welds clean and professional. The improvised stethoscope was ingenious. These weren't poor tools. They were specialized tools, created for specific purposes by people who understood what they needed. "I owe you an apology," I said as we worked. "I judged you before I even knew you. I looked at your toolbox and decided you couldn't possibly handle serious work. That was wrong, and I'm sorry." Maya paused and looked at me, really looked at me, for the first time that morning. "Apology accepted," she said, "but can I tell you something? Please." I've worked with a lot of mechanics who came from high-end shops, racing teams, prestigious dealerships, and most of them had your attitude at first. Looking down at regular garage work, at simple tools, at people who learned their trade in different ways. You know what the difference is between the good ones and the ones who stay bitter? What? The good ones eventually realize that fancy tools don't make you a good mechanic. Understanding vehicles, creative problem-solving, and the humility to keep learning, that's what makes you good. The tools are just tools. We finished putting everything away and began reassembling the components we'd removed to access the starter motor. As we worked, I found myself actually listening to her, asking questions about her time in the army, learning about the kinds of challenges she'd faced and how she'd solved them. By the time we'd buttoned everything up and tests started the Ferrari 3 more times to confirm the fix was stable, I felt different. Lighter somehow, like I'd been carrying around a weight I didn't even know was there. Romano appeared as we were wiping down the engine bay. "So, what's the verdict?" "Dead spot on the starter motor armature," Maya reported. "Got it working again with percussion therapy, but the customer should replace the starter soon. I'd give it maybe 6 months, optimistically, before it fails completely." Romano nodded approvingly. "Good work. Write up the diagnosis and recommendation. I'll call Preston and let him know." He looked at me. "How'd it go, Marcus?" "I learned a lot," I said honestly. Romano's expression softened into something that might have been approval. "That's good to hear. Keep that attitude." After Romano left, I helped Maya fill out the service report, documenting everything we'd found and recommending the starter replacement. David Preston arrived an hour later, relieved and grateful that his Ferrari was running again. He authorized the starter replacement, which we'd complete once the part arrived, and drove off with a wave, the Ferrari's exhaust note echoing down Sunset Boulevard. "Want to grab lunch?" Maya asked as we cleaned up. "There's a decent taco truck about 2 blocks away. My treat. Consider it a welcome to the shop thing." I smiled. "Yeah, I'd like that, but let me pay. It's the least I can do after being such an ass this morning." "Deal," Maya said. As we walked out into the Los Angeles heat, leaving the cool garage behind, I realized something important. I'd come to Romano's shop thinking it was a step down, a punishment for my mistakes, a temporary stop until I could claw my way back to prestigious work, but maybe, just maybe, it was actually exactly where I needed to be. The universe, I was learning, had a funny way of teaching lessons. Sometimes those lessons came wrapped in battered toolboxes and delivered by people you'd underestimated. Sometimes the most important tools weren't the ones in your hands, but the ones in your head and heart. Curiosity, humility, willingness to learn. I was starting to understand that now. But I had no idea that the real lesson was still coming, and it would arrive in the form of the one car I never wanted to face again. 3 weeks passed at Romano's elite auto shop, and I settled into a rhythm I hadn't experienced in years. The work was steady, varied, and surprisingly fulfilling. Oil changes, brake jobs, engine diagnostics, transmission repairs, each task reinforced skills I'd neglected during my years specializing in exotic supercars. More importantly, I was learning to appreciate the craft of automotive repair in its purest form, helping people who depended on their vehicles for work, family, daily life. Maya and I had developed an easy working relationship. After the Ferrari incident, I'd made a conscious effort to set aside my pride and actually listen, not just to her, but to Tommy and Reggie as well. Each person in the shop had decades of combined experience and specialized knowledge. Tommy was extraordinarily gifted at diagnostic puzzles, able to trace intermittent electrical gremlins that would stump most mechanics. Reggie possessed an almost supernatural understanding of engines. He could diagnose problems by sound alone, adjusting his assessment as he listened to an engine run. And Maya, she was like a master craftsperson who understood that every vehicle, regardless of price or prestige, deserved the same methodical approach and creative problem-solving. I'd watched her fix everything from a 1995 Honda with a mysterious misfire to a Tesla with charging issues, approaching each challenge with the same systematic methodology and improvised tools. The weather had shifted as October arrived, bringing cooler temperatures to Los Angeles, but not quite breaking the persistent heat. The smog was lighter, the sunsets more vivid, and the shop settled into the seasonal pattern Romano had described. People preparing their vehicles for holiday travel, tackling repairs they'd put off during the summer, getting ready for the winter months ahead. It was a Thursday afternoon, around 2:30, when Romano called everyone together near the front office. His expression was unreadable, somewhere between serious and concerned, and he held a folder of paperwork in his hands. "Got something I need to discuss with everyone," Romano said once we'd gathered. "Had a very unusual call this morning. Giovanni Rossi contacted me personally. The name hit me like ice water. Giovanni Rossi, the real estate mogul, the owner of the 1962 Ferrari 250 GTO I'd wrecked 6 months ago, the man whose lawsuit had destroyed my career, drained my savings, and blacklisted me from every prestigious shop in Los Angeles. I felt my hands go cold, my stomach tightening into a knot. He's got a problem with the GTO, Romano continued, and I watched his eyes flick toward me briefly. Apparently, the restoration is almost complete. Cost about $8 million to repair all the damage and restore it to original specifications. But there's an issue. The engine won't run properly. Keeps stalling out, losing power, running rough. The restoration team has been working on it for 2 weeks and can't figure it out. Why is he calling here? Reggie asked the question I was too stunned to voice. Because his restoration team recommended our shop, Romano said. Specifically, they recommended Maya. Every eye in the garage turned to Maya, who looked as surprised as I felt. Me? She said. Why me? Apparently one of the lead technicians on the restoration project served with you in the army, Romano explained. Guy named David Martinez. He told Rossi that if anyone could diagnose a tricky engine problem, it would be you. Said you kept a whole motor pool running in Afghanistan when everyone else had given up. Maya's expression shifted to recognition. Martinez. Yeah, I remember him. Good guy, excellent fabricator. She paused. But Frank, this is a 1962 Ferrari 250 GTO. That's not just rare. It's basically automotive royalty. I've worked on classic cars before, but nothing like that. I know, Romano said, and I told Rossi exactly that. But Martinez apparently vouched for you hard. Said your diagnostic skills were the best he'd ever seen. Rossi's desperate. He's got collectors flying in from around the world next month to see the car. And right now it barely runs. The garage was silent for a moment, the weight of the situation settling over everyone. A 1962 Ferrari 250 GTO, one of the most valuable cars in existence. The same car I'd nearly destroyed, and now it was coming here, to this mid-tier garage, because a former army mechanic had been recommended by a colleague. What did you tell him? Maya asked. I said I'd discuss it with my team and call him back, Romano replied. This isn't a normal job. If something goes wrong, if we make the problem worse, we're talking about potential liability that could shut down this shop permanently. I need everyone's honest opinion before I make a decision. Tommy spoke first. I think we should pass. The risk is too high. If those restoration specialists can't figure it out, what makes us think we can? Because sometimes fresh eyes see things the original team missed, Reggie countered. And if Martinez vouched for Maya, there's probably a good reason. But Tommy's not wrong about the risk. Romano looked at me. Marcus, you're the only one here who's actually worked on this specific car. What do you think? Everyone turned to look at me, and I felt my throat go dry. This was the moment I'd been dreading and craving in equal measure since the accident, a chance to face the car again, to prove I wasn't defined by one catastrophic mistake. But it was also terrifying, dredging up memories of the worst day of my professional life. The 250 GTO's engine is incredibly complex for its era, I said slowly, forcing myself to think technically rather than emotionally. Colombo V12. Extremely temperamental, requires precise tuning and understanding of vintage carburetor systems. If it's been fully restored and still isn't running right, the problem is probably something subtle, timing, fuel mixture, possibly even something in the ignition sequence. Could you diagnose it? Romano asked directly. I don't know, I admitted. I've worked on similar engines, but that car... I trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. That car carries a lot of history for you, Maya said gently, understanding immediately what I couldn't articulate. Yeah, I said quietly. Romano studied me for a long moment, then looked at Maya. If we take this job, you'd be lead. Marcus would assist. Given his experience with the vehicle, Reggie and Tommy would provide additional support as needed. But final decisions would be yours, Maya. You comfortable with that? Maya was quiet for several seconds, clearly thinking through the implications. Finally, she nodded. If Marcus is okay with it, then yes, but only if he's actually okay with it, not just saying he is to be professional. Everyone looked at me again. This was it, the moment of truth. I could decline, say I wasn't ready to face that car again, that the emotional weight was too much. Romano would understand. They'd all understand. But as I stood there, feeling the weight of their gazes and the heaviness of my own memories, I realized something important. I'd spent 6 months running from that mistake, trying to forget it, letting it define me. Maybe it was time to face it instead. "I'm in," I said. "Not because I'm completely over what happened. I'm not. But because hiding from it isn't working, and because Maya's right about fresh eyes sometimes seeing what others miss. If anyone can figure this out, it's this team." Romano nodded slowly, respect visible in his expression. "All right then. I'll call Rossi back. Tell him we'll take a look. He's having the car delivered tomorrow morning at 9. This is going to be all hands on deck. We'll put other work on hold for regular customers, but this takes priority. Everyone clear?" We all nodded. "Good. Go home, get some rest. Tomorrow's going to be intense." The crew dispersed, but Maya caught up with me as I was gathering my things to leave. "You sure you're good with this?" she asked quietly. I meant what I said. "We can pass if you're not ready." "I'm not sure I'll ever be ready," I admitted. "But I think I need to do this anyway. Does that make sense?" "Perfect sense," Maya said. "For what it's worth, I'm glad you're going to be there. Your knowledge of that specific car could be the difference between solving this and failing." "I'll try not to let you down," I said. "You won't," Maya said with confidence I didn't feel. "We've got this." I drove home through the late afternoon Los Angeles traffic, my mind racing through everything I knew about Ferrari 250 GTO engines. The Colombo V12 was a masterpiece of 1960s engineering. 0 liters, naturally aspirated, producing around 300 horsepower through 6 Weber carburetors and a complex ignition system. The engine was finicky even when new, requiring constant adjustment and a delicate touch. If the restoration team had been working on it for 2 weeks without solving the problem, it meant the issue was either incredibly subtle or something fundamental that everyone had overlooked. In my experience, engine problems in vintage Ferraris usually fell into a few categories: fuel delivery issues with the carburetors, ignition timing problems, or valve train issues affecting compression. I spent the evening researching, pulling up old technical manuals I'd saved, reviewing specifications and common problems. But as midnight approached and I finally forced myself to go to bed, I couldn't shake the anxiety twisting in my gut. Tomorrow, I would face the car that had destroyed my career. Not to drive it, not to perform routine maintenance, but to diagnose a problem that expert restorers couldn't solve. I barely slept. The next morning, I arrived at the shop at 7:30 to find Maya already there, her battered toolbox open, organizing tools and diagnostic equipment. She looked up as I approached. "Couldn't sleep either?" she asked. "Not really," I admitted. "You?" I kept thinking about what Martinez said about me, about why he recommended me for this. We worked together for 8 months in Afghanistan, maintaining everything from Humvees to heavy transport trucks. He was one of the few people who really understood my approach, systematic, methodical, not jumping to conclusions. She paused. He knew this would be a big deal for me, that it would be a challenge. I think he trusted me with it, because he knew I wouldn't be intimidated by the car's value or history. "Are you intimidated?" "Terrified," Maya said with a slight laugh. "But that's okay. Fear keeps you careful, keeps you from getting overconfident. You taught me that, actually." "I taught you," I said, surprised. "Your mistake with this car, it happened because you got overconfident, pushed too hard. You told me that story last week over lunch. That's a lesson worth remembering when working on something this important. Respect the machine, respect your limitations, and don't let ego override caution." Tommy and Reggie arrived at 8. both unusually quiet, clearly feeling the weight of what was coming. Romano showed up at 8:30, immediately pouring coffee and checking that everyone was ready. At 9:03, a specialized enclosed transport truck pulled up outside the shop, and I felt my heart start hammering. Through the tinted windows of the trailer, I could see a flash of red. The driver was professional and experienced, taking 30 minutes to carefully unload the Ferrari 250 GTO using a custom ramp system and careful spotting. And then, there it was, sitting in the morning sun outside Romano's elite auto shop. It looked perfect. The restoration had been extraordinary. Every panel aligned perfectly, the paint gleaming like liquid ruby, the chrome trim polished to a mirror shine. The damage I'd caused was completely invisible, erased by $8 million of painstaking work and world-class craftsmanship. But when the driver started the engine to move it into the garage, I immediately heard what Rossi's team was talking about. The V12 fired up, but ran rough, missing on at least one cylinder, the sound uneven and troubled. It was like hearing a trained singer try to perform with laryngitis. You could hear the potential, the quality underneath, but something was fundamentally wrong. Giovanni Rossi arrived 15 minutes later in a black Mercedes S-Class, accompanied by a man I didn't recognize. Late 30s, Italian, dressed in expensive casual wear. "This is Marco Vitale," Rossi said, introducing his companion. He oversaw the restoration. "Marco, this is Frank Romano and his team." We shook hands, and I saw Vitale's eyes linger on me for a moment, clearly recognizing me from the accident, but he said nothing, maintaining professional courtesy. "The engine work was particularly challenging," Vitale explained, his English colored by a thick Italian accent. "We rebuilt completely. New pistons, new rings, re-sleeve cylinders, new camshafts, everything to original specifications. We synchronized the carburetors perfectly, set the timing according to factory specifications, verified compression across all cylinders. Everything tests perfect, but it runs like, how do you say, garbage." "Can you demonstrate the problem?" Maya asked. Vitale nodded and climbed into the driver's seat. He started the engine, and again that rough, uneven idle filled the garage. He revved it gently, and we could all hear the engine hesitating, missing, stumbling over itself. "At speed, it is worse," Vitale said, shutting off the engine. "It loses power, backfires, sometimes stalls completely. We have checked everything. Fuel pressure, ignition timing, valve clearances, everything. We are, how do you say, pulling our hairs out." "We'll figure it out," Maya said confidently. "Give us a day to diagnose it properly." Rossi and Vitale exchanged glances, then Rossi nodded. "You have 2 days. If you cannot solve it, we will have to ship it to Maranello, to Ferrari's restoration facility in Italy. I would prefer not to do this. The logistics are complicated and expensive, but I have collectors expecting to see this car running perfectly in 4 weeks. After Rossi and Vitale departed, the 4 of us gathered around the Ferrari. It sat in the center bay, beautiful and broken, a $45 million puzzle. "All right," Maya said, pulling out her notebook. "Let's start with basics. Marcus, you know this car. Where would you begin?" And just like that, we were working together, not as lead and assistant, not as expert and novice, but as a team, pooling knowledge and experience to solve a problem. I explained everything I knew about the Colombo V12 engine, its quirks and common issues. Maya organized our diagnostic approach, systematic and methodical. Tommy handled the electronics, testing ignition components. Reggie listened to the engine running, his experienced ear picking up nuances the rest of us might miss. We worked through the afternoon, testing everything Vitale's team had already tested, verifying their work. Everything checked out. Fuel delivery was perfect. Ignition timing was spot on. Compression was even across all 12 cylinders. By 5 o'clock, we'd confirmed that everything should work perfectly. But it didn't. There's something we're missing, Maya said, frustration creeping into her voice for the first time. Something fundamental that everyone's overlooking. Let's call it for tonight, Romano suggested. Fresh eyes tomorrow morning might help. We secured the Ferrari and closed up the shop, but I couldn't let it go. I stood in the parking lot staring back at the garage, knowing that car was sitting in there, beautiful and broken, waiting for us to be smart enough to understand its problem. Maya walked up beside me. You thinking what I'm thinking? That we're going to solve this? I asked. Yeah, she said. We are. I don't know how yet, but we will. I believed her. Tomorrow would bring answers. It had to. I arrived at Romano's elite auto shop at 6 in the morning, 2 hours before everyone else, unable to stay away. The cool October dawn was just breaking over Los Angeles, painting the sky in soft purples and oranges, the city still relatively quiet before rush-hour chaos descended. I let myself in through the side door, using the key Romano had given me the previous week, a small gesture of trust that meant more than he probably realized. The Ferrari 250 GTO sat exactly where we'd left it, gleaming under the fluorescent lights, beautiful and frustrating in equal measure. I approached it slowly, like you might approach a wild animal, aware that this car represented both my greatest failure and potentially my redemption. I didn't turn on the engine. Instead, I just sat in the driver's seat, hands on the steering wheel, breathing in the smell of leather and metal and history. The last time I'd sat here, I'd been cocky, confident, certain of my expertise. Now I was different, humbled, more careful, but hopefully wiser. Couldn't stay away either? I turned to see Maya entering the garage, carrying 2 cups of coffee from the good cafe 3 blocks away, not the gas station swill I usually grabbed. Figured you'd be here early, she said, handing me a cup. You strike me as the type who can't let go of an unsolved problem. Takes one to know one, I said, accepting the coffee gratefully. Any brilliant insights overnight? A few ideas, Maya said, pulling up a rolling stool and sitting beside the open driver's door. I've been thinking about what Vitale said, that they rebuilt everything to original specifications, tested everything, verified everything. In my experience, when everything tests perfect but doesn't work, the problem is usually something outside the scope of what you're testing. Like what? I asked. That's what I haven't figured out yet, Maya admitted. But there's something about this car, something specific to its history or configuration that's causing the problem. We need to think differently than Vitale's team did. We sat in comfortable silence for a few minutes, sipping coffee and thinking. The garage was peaceful at this hour, just the hum of the lights and the distant sound of early morning traffic. Tell me about that day, Maya said suddenly. The day you crashed it, not the accident itself. I mean before. What was the car like when it was running properly? I was surprised by the question, but I thought back carefully. It was incredible. The engine note was perfect, this deep, powerful sound that vintage V12s have. The throttle response was immediate. Everything felt tight, responsive, exactly how a well-maintained classic Ferrari should feel. How was the idle? Smooth. Not modern car smooth. But for a 1960s car with carburetors, it was remarkably steady. And when you drove it, before the accident, did you notice anything unusual? Anything at all? I thought harder, pushing past the memory of the crash to focus on the minutes before. Actually, yeah, there was a slight hesitation when I first accelerated hard, like the engine needed a second to catch up. I remember thinking I should mention it to the owner, but then everything else happened. Maya's eyes narrowed thoughtfully. Hesitation on hard acceleration. That's interesting. Why? Because hesitation usually means a fuel delivery issue. The engine wanting more fuel than it's getting in that moment. But Vitale said they verified fuel pressure was perfect. They did, I confirmed. We tested it yesterday too. The fuel pump is delivering exactly the right pressure, and the carburetors are synchronized perfectly. Right, but that's fuel pressure and carburetor synchronization, Maya said, standing up suddenly, energized by a thought. What about the fuel itself? Not the pressure or delivery, but the actual fuel reaching the cylinders. I don't follow, I admitted. Come here, Maya said, walking around to the front of the car where the hood was already open. She pointed at the engine, specifically at the 6 Weber carburetors lined up on the V12. Each carburetor feeds 2 cylinders, right? Right. And Vitaly's team synchronized them perfectly, adjusted all the jets, verified everything was delivering the right air-fuel mixture. Right. But what if one carburetor is getting less fuel than the others, not because of a pressure problem or synchronization issue, but because something is physically restricting the flow before it even reaches that carburetor? I felt something click in my mind. You're thinking a blockage? Maybe, or maybe something more subtle. Maya pulled out her phone and started searching for something. I want to see the original specifications for the fuel system on a 1962 250 GTO. We spent the next 20 minutes digging through technical documentation, and Maya's theory started to make more sense. The fuel system on these cars was complex. Fuel moved from the tank through multiple filters and lines before reaching the carburetors. Any restriction anywhere in that system could cause the exact symptoms we were seeing. But Vitaly's team would have checked that, I pointed out. They're not amateurs. They checked what they thought was there, Maya said. But what if something changed during the restoration? What if they modified something, thinking they were restoring it, but actually altered the fuel flow characteristics? Tommy and Reggie arrived at 7:30, and we brought them up to speed on Maya's theory. Romano showed up at 8, listened to our explanation, and gave us the green light to investigate further. You've got one more day, he reminded us. If we can't solve this by tomorrow afternoon, Rossi is shipping it to Italy. We attacked the fuel system methodically, starting from the tank and working forward. The fuel tank had been completely restored and sealed. Perfect. The main fuel line was new, properly sized. Perfect. The fuel pump was new and working flawlessly. Perfect. We reached the fuel filter, located between the pump and the carburetor manifold, around noon. It was a new filter, installed during the restoration, exactly the type specified in the Ferrari parts catalogue. Wait, I said suddenly, a memory surfacing. What's the part number on that filter? Maya read it off the housing, and I immediately grabbed my phone, pulling up vintage Ferrari part specifications. What I found made my stomach drop. That's the wrong filter, I said. What? Maya leaned over to look at my phone screen. But Vitaly said they used factory specifications. They did. Factory specifications for a 1963 model year 250 GTO. Look at the part number. It's almost identical to the 1962 spec, but the internal flow rate is slightly different. Ferrari changed the filter design between the 1962 and 1963 model years because they modified the fuel pump pressure. Would that really cause this much of a problem? Tommy asked. On a car this precisely tuned? Absolutely, I said, excitement building. The carburetors are adjusted for a specific fuel flow rate. If the filter is restricting flow even slightly, the rear carburetors, which are furthest from the fuel pump, would get less fuel than the front ones. That would cause exactly the symptoms we're seeing: rough idle, power loss, hesitation. Why didn't Vitaly's team catch this? Reggie asked. Because when they tested fuel pressure, they tested it at the pump and probably at the first carburetor, Maya said, understanding dawning on her face. They wouldn't have tested flow rate at each individual carburetor, because once you verify the pressure and synchronization, you assume it's even across all 6. But it's not, I said. The wrong filter is causing a restriction that creates uneven flow. We looked at each other, all thinking the same thing. We might have just solved an $8 million puzzle. We need the correct filter, Romano said practically. Can we get one? I was already on the phone with a vintage Ferrari parts supplier I'd worked with years ago. 20 minutes later, I had the answer. They had exactly one 1962 spec fuel filter in stock at their warehouse in San Diego. For an extra fee, they could have it couriered to us by 5 o'clock that afternoon. Do it, Romano said, whatever it costs. The filter arrived at 4:45, delivered by a courier who had clearly been told this was an emergency. The part was tiny, just a small cylindrical filter element that probably weighed less than a pound and cost about $300. But it might be worth $45 million in results. We installed it carefully, Maya and I working together while Tommy and Reggie watched, Romano hovering nearby. The installation took 15 minutes. When it was done, we stepped back, and I realized my hands were shaking slightly. "Want to do the honors?" Maya asked me. I shook my head. "This was your diagnosis, your theory. You should start it." Maya nodded and climbed into the driver's seat. She turned the key, and the Colombo V12 fired up. The difference was immediate and unmistakable. The engine note was smooth, powerful even, the sound a Ferrari V12 was supposed to make. No roughness, no hesitation, no missing cylinders. Just 12 cylinders firing in perfect harmony, creating the mechanical symphony that made these cars legendary. Maya revved the engine gently, and it responded instantly, cleanly, beautifully. She let it idle, and it sat there purring like a contented cat, absolutely steady. "Holy shit," Tommy breathed. "That's it," Reggie said, shaking his head in amazement. "That's the sound it should make." Maya shut off the engine and climbed out, her face lit up with the kind of smile that comes from solving an impossible problem. We did it. We actually did it. Romano was already on the phone with Giovanni Rossi, asking him to come to the shop immediately. Rossi arrived 30 minutes later, Vitale in tow, both looking skeptical but hopeful. Maya explained what we'd found, calmly, professionally, without dramatics, showing them the two filters side by side and explaining how the slight difference in flow rate had caused all the problems. "But the part number in the Ferrari catalogue," Vitale started, "was for 1963, Maya interrupted gently. "Not 1962. Easy mistake to make. They're almost identical. But on a car this precisely tuned, that small difference matters." Rossi looked at the filters, then at Maya, then at the rest of us. "Show me," he said simply. I started the engine while everyone stood back and listened. The V12 sang beautifully, and I saw Rossi's expression shift from skepticism to wonder to relief in the space of seconds. "That is the sound," he said quietly. "That is exactly how it sounded before the accident." Vitale looked simultaneously relieved and embarrassed. "I'm so sorry, Mr. Rossi. We should have caught this. We should have verified." "You were working from specifications," Rossi interrupted. "These things happen. What matters is that it's fixed." He looked at Maya with genuine respect. "How did you figure it out?" "Team effort," Maya said, gesturing to include all of us. Marcus knew the car's history and behavior. Tommy and Reggie helped verify the diagnosis. Romano gave us the time and trust to solve it properly. That's how good work happens, people working together. Rossi nodded slowly, then turned to Romano. "I want to pay you double your normal rate. This was extraordinary work under pressure." "Not necessary," Romano said. "We charge fair rates for good work. That's it." "Then I will tell every collector and enthusiast I know about this shop," Rossi said firmly. "That is how I can repay you." After Rossi and Vitale left, Rossi driving the Ferrari away personally, the V12 sound echoing down Sunset Boulevard in perfect mechanical glory, the five of us stood in the garage, processing what had just happened. "You know what this means?" Romano said, looking at me and Maya specifically. Word's going to get around. We'll start getting high-end work, classic cars, maybe even other Ferraris. The shop's reputation just went up several levels. That's great, Maya said, and she meant it. But she was looking at me with concern. You okay? I realized I'd been quiet since Rossi left, and everyone was watching me. Yeah, I said, and found that I meant it. Yeah, I'm okay, better than okay, actually. That car destroyed my career, my reputation, everything I'd built. And today we fixed it, not just mechanically, but, I don't know, we fixed something else too. Your relationship with your mistake, Maya said quietly, understanding. Yeah, I agreed. I've spent 6 months being defined by that crash, letting it make me bitter and arrogant and defensive. But working on this car today, as part of a team, actually listening and learning instead of trying to prove I'm the smartest person in the room, it reminded me why I became a mechanic in the first place. Why did you become a mechanic? Tommy asked. Because I love solving puzzles, I said. Because there's something deeply satisfying about fixing something broken, about understanding how complex systems work and making them better. Somewhere along the way, I forgot that. I got caught up in the prestige, the expensive cars, the ego boost, but that was never what mattered. What matters is the work, Reggie said simply. The work, I agreed, and the people you do it with. Romano clapped me on the shoulder. Damn right. Now come on, let's close up shop and go get dinner. My treat, we're celebrating. Over Thai food at a restaurant 2 blocks away, we talked and laughed and relived the moment when the Ferrari's engine had roared to life perfectly. I looked around the table at these people, Tommy with his diagnostic genius, Reggie with his decades of experience, Romano with his hard-won wisdom, and Maya with her systematic brilliance and battered toolbox, and realized something profound. I'd thought coming to this shop was a step down, a punishment, a temporary stop before I could return to the high-end world I'd lost. But I'd been completely wrong. This was exactly where I needed to be. These were exactly the people I needed to learn from. The best tools I'd learned weren't the most expensive ones or the newest technology. They were the ones you understood deeply and used skillfully. The best mechanics weren't the ones with the most prestigious clients or impressive resumes. They were the ones who approached every job with humility, creativity, and respect for the machine and the problem. And the best shops weren't the ones with the fanciest equipment or the richest customers. They were the ones where people worked as a team, learned from each other, and took pride in work well done, regardless of whether that work was on a $45 million Ferrari or a 15-year-old Honda. I had laughed at Maya's tools, dismissed this shop as beneath me, and nearly missed the most important lesson of my career, that expertise isn't about what you have, but about how you think, how you approach problems, and how you treat the people around you. 3 months later, I was still at Romano's elite auto shop, and I had no intention of leaving. Word about the Ferrari repair had indeed spread through collector circles, and we now handled about 1 high-end classic car per month, alongside our regular work. But I found I enjoyed the variety. Monday might be a vintage Porsche, Tuesday a Honda Civic, Wednesday a Tesla, Thursday a Ford F-150. Every job mattered. Every customer deserved our best work. Maya and I had become close friends, and I'd learned more from her in these months than I'd learned in years at prestigious shops. She taught me patience, systematic thinking, and the art of creative problem-solving when perfect tools or parts weren't available. In return, I shared my knowledge of high-end vehicles, helped train Tommy on European car diagnostics, and worked with Reggie to document some of his intuitive knowledge into formats others could learn from. Romano had promoted me to senior mechanic, though the title meant less than the trust implied. And I'd started teaching an evening class at a local technical college, sharing hard-won lessons with the next generation of mechanics. The Giovanni Rossi lawsuit was settled finally, with significantly reduced damages thanks to character witnesses from Romano and several satisfied customers. My savings were still depleted, my fancy condo was long gone, but I'd found something more valuable than money or status. I'd found purpose, community, and the humility to keep learning. On a cool December morning, I arrived at the shop to find a young woman waiting nervously by the entrance. She was maybe 23, dressed in coveralls that were too big for her, carrying a toolbox that looked even more battered than Maya's had when I first saw it. "Can I help you?" I asked. "I'm supposed to start today," she said nervously. "I'm the new apprentice, Sarah Chen, no relation, I assume." She smiled at her own joke, then looked down at her toolbox self-consciously. "I know my tools aren't great. I'm still building my collection. I hope that's okay." I looked at her worn tools, her nervous expression, her obvious passion despite her anxiety, and I smiled. "Your tools are perfect," I said warmly. "Trust me on this. Come on, I'll introduce you to the team and show you around. You're going to love it here." As I held the door open for her and she walked into Romano's elite auto shop, I caught a glimpse of Maya arriving in her truck, waving as she grabbed her own battered toolbox from the bed. I thought about the mechanic I'd been 6 months ago, arrogant, bitter, defined by failure and pride, and I thought about the mechanic I was now, still learning, still growing, but finally understanding what really mattered. The tools I'd learned were never the point. The work was the point. The people were the point. The constant pursuit of knowledge, the humility to accept mistakes, and the courage to keep trying even after catastrophic failure. Those were the points. I'd laughed at Maya's tools until she restarted the Ferrari I'd destroyed. But in doing so, she'd restarted something far more important. She'd restarted me. The end.